Today's teardown is on an engine that's been kicking around the shop for way too long. I'm really bad about this. This is a Mercedes M137 5.8 liter V12. It's found in the early W220 chassis S-Class, the CL600, like 01, 02 for example. And this engine is kind of the unwanted V12. A lot of people prefer its successor, the bi-turbo M275, which someday I'll probably own one, or its predecessor, which I like as well, that came in the W140 chassis and the R129. But this engine, these were not really designed for power. It makes 360 horsepower, which is not a little amount. They were designed for smoothness, fuel efficiency. I think they had cylinder deactivation, which is pretty early on for that system. I know they came out with that on, GM had that, but that worked well. This engine was notorious for burning oil, fouling plugs, killing oxygen sensors and cats. A lot of these got replaced under warranty. I really don't know a lot about how these fail. I'll be completely honest with you. This is the very first V12 of this generation I've had in the shop. I've had its successor, but I've never had one of these. As well as the part value isn't really there. The coils are worth a bunch of money because they fit its successor, but this one's broken. The other side might be good. The rest of it might end up as wall art or scrap metal. We'll see. It might get lucky here. As far as what's actually wrong with this core, well, I can tell you it does turn over, which is kind of suspicious. And then it has a melted or seized bearing on this tensioner, which I don't understand how the engine, maybe that failed and the engine overheated. It's hard to say. But anyway, we're going to get this thing apart, see what makes it tick. Hopefully it's not too bad, although I have my doubts. I'll show you how this thing turns over. Keep in mind this thing has plugs in it, so it has plenty of compression. Don't worry, it's not going to fall. At least I don't think it's going to fall. It definitely turns over like an engine would if it has good compression. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the coil packs, and then we'll talk about those. We'll get the plugs out and see how they look. There's one. Unfortunately, that coil left a lot of the rubber insulators in the head. And that side left every single one, except for one. Let's take a moment and talk about the ignition system on this Mercedes V12. And this is probably what I consider the Achilles heel for this engine as far as maintenance cost or ownership cost. And the big issue here is that when one cylinder's coil fails, you have to replace the entire bank of ignition system. You can't just replace individual coils like on 99% of the vehicles out there. You have to replace the entire thing. And these are not cheap. And when I say they're not cheap, I'm not talking about $300. I'm talking about 4 digits. And that's just for half of the engine. The other side could go bad, and then hopefully you can make your mortgage payment. They kept this design through the M275 as well. And it's quite unfortunate. I don't know if there's an aftermarket solution for this. I haven't really looked into that. But these are worth a bunch of money even if they're used. I might be able to even sell this damaged one. That's the crazy thing. It's just, these are a very poor design in my opinion. All right, let's get the plugs out of it. Well, that wasn't good. I'm really bad at this. Well, this is probably the most amount of spark plugs I've ever pulled out of an engine, at least on this channel. And as you can see, they've all been exposed to water. So this engine sat outside, had water sitting in the plug wells. This is why you see all the rust. Now the plugs themselves don't look terribly damaged. I don't see any bent electrodes or smashed electrodes. The pistons didn't re-gap these plugs, which is good. However, they all look pretty dark and dingy, like this thing was burning oil, which this engine is notorious for. They're kind of wet looking, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's why this engine was replaced. The next thing is to pull the throttle actuator and these intake tubes. We'll see how that comes apart. Well, that was easy. These have band clamps on the intake. I'm going to try to take both sides off at the same time. Very stubborn. Oh, okay. It comes off that way. I don't know where to go with this. Now it looks like I got to pull this PCV system off somehow. It's moving, kind of. It's one of those things where you pull on it and then you go flying across the shop. I'd like to avoid that if possible. This rubber is a lot softer than I anticipated, but they still get hard and crack and then get formed. The heat cycles. There we are. Next, we're going to unbolt the center bolts of the intake manifold. We'll see how much more there is. Is that it? Oh, that's it. All right. Let's lift this up. Nah. Just because it moves doesn't mean it's all the way off. Question is, what did I miss? Hey, that seems to do stuff. Maybe I gotta take all the bolts out. I bet you that's it. Yeah, that's gonna be it. Let's get all these bolts out of here. Okay. Well, that feels a lot better. I was hoping to pull it with the bolts, but it's not how she comes off. Ooh, this engine comes bearing gifts. So these are the injector retainer clips off the harness. And I always get harnesses in here that are missing these, or they get lost while they get pulled. So I'm going to hang on to those. That's nice. Let's get the intake gaskets up. Well, it looks like all of the intake ports have a little bit of debris, but nothing metal. I don't see any bent valves. They're all wet. They're like oil's been sitting in them. I don't think it's water. This thing was pretty well sealed up, if I'm being honest, but they all look about the same, so no signs of issues yet. Before I start pulling valve covers, I'm going to get this water neck out of the way. I suppose we'll start with the driver's side valve cover. All right, well, that's super light. I don't know if that's aluminum or magnesium. A lot of European manufacturers, that looks like it might be magnesium actually. At first glance, it looks pretty decent. It's not terribly dirty. Yeah, it looks all right. Now for the passenger side. Yeah, these valve covers are definitely magnesium. You can see there's little bubbles here in the bottom of the finish where the interior finish is starting to bubble off. This side also looks very good. A little bit of wear on that cam. Not bad. It's really not bad. Looks nice and clean in here. I'm going to take a second and remove the exhaust manifolds off this side of the engine. Let's go ahead and get some of these other brackets out of the way. Some of my keen viewers would have noticed there's a difference between the driver's side and passenger side cylinder heads on this engine. This engine is not variable valve timing, but it does have cylinder deactivation, and these are all components of that system, which is why it looks different. It has a different, like a solenoid pack here on the front. This is a tube that has oil pressure that feeds this actuator here, and this is the side that gets deactivated. I think it's below 3,000 RPM, and I'm sure there's a throttle parameter as well. Next, we're going to remove this piece here. And there we go. Pretty interesting component there. Now I'm going to start removing this water outlet here, the thermostat housing. There we go. Now we're going to go ahead and pull the plate off the other side. Just get this out of the way. That was funny. There we are. A quick look at the chain. It's a dual row chain. Everything looks pretty tidy in here. Probably the slack is probably in that area. And here's a tensioner over here. We'll take that loose in a minute. The rest of this looks pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the cam gear bolts, as there's the most tension on it with everything still complete. All right. As you can see, the cam gears have pulled off of the cam. I got to remove this bracket, which I think is secondary air injection. I could be wrong, but I got to remove this so I can get the timing chain tensioner out. Now, it may be hard to see, but there are actually pins that hold the timing chain guide in place, and they go through the front of the head. There's not a seal or an O-ring, they're just a zero tolerance fit. So I need to use a slide hammer with, I'm going to use one of the bolts that came off this engine. And these usually don't take too much force to get out, but they come out pretty easy. On the driver's side. All right, let's try to get this chain loose here. It's kind of in a bind now. There we go, spring loaded. All right, let's see how this one comes apart. Much the same. Yeah, let's get some of that chain tension off. And then it'll come right out like that. Oh, that's great. All right, now we're going to take this assembly apart, the rocker assembly apart, and check for damage. It looks like I can pull the head without removing this, but it'll be a lot easier if this is out of the way. Got some oil passages in here. Looks like the screens look okay. Oh man, look at that junk. That's not okay. Got sludge oil that's blocking the screen on that solenoid. Next, let's check the rear. That's what she said. Yeah, even worse. Here, let me get something to pick at this with. So here is that solenoid, and look at all that junk. Yeah, that's not good. All right, let's go ahead and pull the rest of the cam caps loose. Yep, that's just to feed oil pressure. It's a good thing these are lettered. It'll make reassembly very easy. Cam out. The cam journals in the rocker assembly look pretty good. I don't see any signs of wear. All the followers here, everything looks pretty solid. The cam also looks very good. Little bit of wear on the lobes, but really not bad. Not like something came apart. All right, let's pull the rocker assembly out. Might be easier said than done. There we are. Wow, that's pretty heavy. All right, now it's time to crack the head bolts loose, see if we can get this head off. I have no idea how tight these are going to be. Oh, it's going to be like that. I don't really want to chase this engine around, but now there are two more little sneaky bolts. They're E10s. And that should be the end of it. Now I think we are ready to pull the cylinder head. Oh yeah, there's still coolant in it. It's no big deal. I got a drain pan set up this time. Man, head gasket does not want to let go. It's going to though. Although the block looks pretty decent. I don't see any grooves. No adjustable rods. Go ahead and pull this head gasket off. See if we can get this off without cutting my leg off. Ah, that was easy. Everything looks okay in here. No signs of any carnage or anything like that. We didn't really expect that though. Let's go ahead and pull the cam caps off of this and pull it off with the cam and rocker. Might be able to pull the whole thing together here. Sure would be nice. There we are. One chunk of valve train. Before we get the big head bolts out, we're going to get these two little ones here. Let's get some head bolts out. All right, let's see how much this head fights us. And yes, I've left the exhaust manifolds on. They're just easier to do with the head on a bench. Looks like someone left their toothpaste in the cooling system. But outside of that, I don't see any weird signs. No damage. All the pistons look good. All the bores look good. And I think these engines are notorious for out-of-round bores, but it's going to be hard to see that with the naked eye, I can tell you that. Something else I noticed before we get anything else off, that water pump is spent. That is done. I wonder if that has anything to do with why the engine is no longer in the vehicle. Let's go ahead and pull this pulley off. They always sound like that. Now let's get the crank pulley off. Oh, that did it. That's probably right. Probably a good idea to bounce this, right? It's moving. There we go. One thing I did want to mention before we get too far, this is the valley cover. It's got the coolant through here, crankcase ventilation over here. I can't imagine having to replace this in the car. If this leaks, if this gasket fails, I can't imagine. I don't know how bad that would be. But we're going to pull it out to see what it looks like. Look at that. It's pretty wild. All right, let's start pulling the water pump. We'll get the water pump off and start taking all the other bolts out for the front cover. I think that's all of them. Put this here just in case. Well, bearings are definitely bad in the water pump, but it didn't make contact with the block. Okay, let's keep going. There's a bunch of bolts to take out. Oh yeah, she'll come off. There's the front cover and the pile of timing chain inside. All right, looks like I gotta take that out to get the chain out. Here's a timing guide. A little chewed up here on the edge, but not bad. That one looks good. Into the trash they go. Wow, that's really tight. That's really tight. Maybe it's reverse thread. Ha! Oh, I'm glad I didn't force that. Save that for later. So I don't see any deposits or anything weird in here. This is all in really good shape. It has another chain for the oil pump right there. Part of that. No, that actually is, no, yeah, that's broke. Not bad though. It keeps breaking more in my hand, but that's fine. It's normal. That's the oil pump drive chain. Now it's time to tip this over and likely make a mess, which I have a drain pan this time, so it ain't the end of the world. Really not bad. I just noticed a little dent and cracks in the lower pan. That explains why this thing's been leaving a mess on my shop floor as it's been sitting, but I don't think that happened while it was running. I think that likely happened when it was being moved around before I got my hands on it, or maybe it happened here. It's hard to say, but either way, I don't think that's the reason the engine's bad. I don't think. Now it's time to pull the lower oil pan. Don't want to crack it now. The inside of the pan is a little dirty, but it's not full of debris. There's a couple globs of, I don't know what, but I don't see any, no like chunks of metal. That looks like plastic. It could have been off of that timing chain guide. And unfortunately, I can't see the screen for the pickup. It's inside here, I would imagine. But here's like an oil level sensor, it looks like. Looks pretty simple in here. This is all, so far, easy to work on. Next, we're going to go ahead and pull the upper oil pan. Here's a better look at the oil pump here. This is the factory windage tray, which we're going to pull that out of the way now. There, now you can see all the rods and pistons. Well, at least all the rods. Now we're going to go ahead and try to get this oil pump out of the way. I don't know if I'll be able to get this out or not because of that chain. There we go. It's a neat looking oil pump. Now let's start getting all 12 rods and pistons out. There's one. There's two. All right, turn this over. There's a lot of parts here. They all came out really easy, almost too easy. It tells me that the bores might be worn or out of round. The pistons just fell right out of it, but no major bearing damage. There's a little bit of damage. Some grooves, all really minor. I don't see any major issues here. We didn't see any signs of metal run through this engine, and if the bearings had come apart at all, we would have seen signs in several places in the top of that engine. I looked over the rods and pistons very closely. This is the non-DOD or displacement deactivation side, and this is the side that does get deactivated. And all of this looked good until I noticed one thing, and it's really not that apparent, but on this rod and piston, the ring gap is at the same section of the piston, and that's not supposed to be in that location on the piston. So I don't know if the rings moved in their ring lands, and then that cylinder might have low compression. It's really hard to say thus far. Now we're going to split the block to get the crank out. I got about 8,000 bolts to take out. We're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, let's see if we can get this block split here. Well, it looks like there's a dowel back here by the bell housing. I thought it was a bolt at first, but it's not. Yeah, she's coming. Okay, now what? And we're apart. Crank looks pretty nice. See any damage, but I didn't think we would based on what we saw on the rod bearings. Oh, thrust bearings walking out. Uh-oh. What have we done? Ah, the other thrust bearing. Yeah, it looks nice. As predicted, the main bearings look pretty nice. The bores look pretty good as well. This block is in really good shape. Far cry from the engines I've done recently. Here's the crank. I have been dreading taking that engine apart for quite some time. It looked very intimidating with that intake manifold. But once that intake manifold came off, it was actually really easy. There was nothing difficult about taking that engine apart. It's very straightforward. I wouldn't be scared to work on one at all. The architecture is very similar to other engines from Mercedes in that era, the 8 cylinders and the 6 cylinders. There's a lot of stuff that is similar, so the same thought processes are behind how to take it apart. I really wish I knew what happened to this engine. I can't put my finger on exactly why this engine was a core. It could be the ring gap alignment on that one cylinder was a low compression situation, or we saw the melted tensioner pulley, that bearing was locked up, the water pump had a bunch of play in it. There's a couple different theories here, but there's one that we haven't really discussed on this channel, and that is the value of the engine. So if a yard gets a car in with the engine that's worth $600 or $700 or maybe less, and they have no key, or maybe they do have a key, they can't get it started, the fuel pumps are out, they're not going to go through all the work to get that running if the engine's only worth $600 or $700 or less. It's just not worth the time investment. I do it here, but I am a small scale. But some other yards, they won't do that. So they might have bought that car for scrap weight, cut the converters off, sold a few body panels, and then ripped the engine out and sold it as a core. It was an unknown engine. That is essentially what cores are. So I didn't really see too much wrong with this. It could have had a ton of miles on it and been taken care of, or maybe it had really low miles on it and it wasn't taken care of. It really wasn't that dirty inside. I think this thing had its oil changed on time. If you'd like to buy parts from this engine, which there's not a lot that's worth a bunch of money, but I'll sell anything off of it, I'm going to leave our email in the video description. And as always, I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one.